Imagine standing your ground in the face of humiliation, knowing that every single eye in the room is judging you. Now imagine being an 11-year-old girl, not just any child, but a billionaire, a black CEO in a world where you're not supposed to belong. But today that little girl is about to take a stand. And this seat? This seat is just the beginning. What happens when a flight attendant, a man with power, and an 11-year-old girl collide? Will the child back down, or will she change everything? What if one call, just one call, could bring an entire airline to its knees? What if that call wasn't about safety but something much darker?
And what if this simple act of injustice didn't just cost a seat,
but threatened to unravel the fate of an entire corporation? Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to see how this powerful story unfolds. Don't miss a second of what happens when justice is just one call away. Amara stood frozen in front of the man, gripping her boarding pass so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Excuse me, you're in my seat." Her voice was steady, but the fluttering in her chest told a different story. The seat was hers, clearly marked 2A, but the man didn't seem to care. He didn't even look at her. He just muttered under his breath, "Find another." Amara's heart raced. This wasn't just a seat. This was a symbol. She was a young black girl, traveling alone in first class, an achievement she'd worked so hard for. But here was a man, in a fancy suit, treating her as if she didn't belong. His dismissive attitude stung, but she didn't back down. The flight attendant arrived, noticing the exchange. Instead of checking the boarding pass, she turned toward Amara, her expression uncertain. "You'll need to move to economy," she said, pointing toward the crowded back of the plane. The cabin fell silent. Passengers around them whispered, sensing the tension. Some were sympathetic, others confused. But Amara stood there, her chin raised, refusing to step aside. This seat was hers. She had the ticket to prove it. But the question lingered. What would happen when a young girl fought back against the system? A man with power and a flight crew that seemed to side with him. The eyes of the passengers were on her now. Every single one of them watching, waiting for what she would do next. Would she give in, or would she fight for what was rightfully hers? Will Amara stand up for herself, or will she let them take her place? The man leaned back in his seat, his smug expression deepening as he crossed his arms. The flight attendant hesitated, glancing from Amara to him, unsure of how to proceed. The tension in the air thickened as Amara's father, Marcus, stood up from his seat in economy and made his way toward the front of the plane. He was calm, but his presence was powerful. His voice, firm yet measured, cut through the silence. "Sir, that seat was purchased for my daughter. She has the boarding pass to prove it." But the man didn't flinch. He didn't even look at Marcus. His gaze remained fixed on the flight attendant. And with a dismissive sneer, he spoke again. "I'm not moving. First class is for serious travelers, not children playing pretend." The words were sharp, full of disdain, and they hurt more than Amara expected, especially when spoken so loudly, in front of so many strangers. She had heard similar words before, words that dismissed her, belittled her for being young, for being black, but hearing them from a man in first class, in front of a flight crew, hit differently. As the conversation continued, Amara felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She wasn't just fighting for a seat. She was fighting for her place in the world, a place that this man clearly thought she didn't deserve. The flight attendant looked back at her, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "Maybe you could just sit in economy for today." The words cut deeper than expected. The passengers in the cabin watched in stunned silence, some whispering, others waiting for Amara to respond. But just before the situation could escalate further, a small sound from the back of the plane broke through the tension. The man's phone vibrating. What is this man doing? Is this call going to change everything? Will it bring the flight to a halt? Marcus stood motionless, his jaw clenched, fighting to keep his anger under control. "That will not happen," he said firmly. "She belongs here. She paid for this seat like anyone else." His voice carried authority, but it wasn't just the words that commanded respect. It was the love for his daughter that was evident in his every movement. The man, still lounging in his seat, shrugged and scoffed. He had no intention of backing down. If she wants it so badly, maybe she should learn the world doesn't bend for her, he muttered, almost as if daring anyone to challenge him. His words dripped with contempt. But as the passengers watched, something unexpected happened. Across the aisle, a woman with silver hair, sitting quietly for most of the exchange, stood up. Her voice was calm but unyielding. "Excuse me," she said, turning toward the man. "That girl's ticket is valid. Why should she give up her rightful place for your convenience? For a moment, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The man glared at the woman, his face reddening with rage, but she didn't flinch. The passengers shifted in their seats, some nodding in agreement, others avoiding eye contact, but all of them clearly feeling the shift in the atmosphere. The flight attendant, now visibly shaken, glanced nervously between the two adults before she muttered, "Let me check with the captain." And with that, she hurried toward the front of the plane, leaving Amara and her father standing in the middle of the tension-filled cabin. As Marcus placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, he whispered, "Stand tall, Sparrow." Amara nodded quietly, the sting of humiliation starting to mix with a growing sense of determination. She wasn't just a girl. She wasn't just someone whose seat had been stolen. What will happen when the captain finds out? Will they side with the man or do what's right? What's the real reason behind the delay? Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The cabin was thick with anticipation. Passengers shifted in their seats, exchanging uncomfortable glances, whispering to each other, unsure of what was going to happen next. The flight attendant had disappeared toward the front of the plane, and the uneasy silence seemed to stretch on forever. Then, suddenly, the calm voice of the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security concern, this aircraft will return to the gate. Please remain seated. Security will board shortly." The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the announcement registered. Confusion spread quickly. Some passengers muttered angrily, annoyed by the unexpected delay. Others looked around, nervously wondering what was really happening. But Amara's heart skipped a beat. She knew what was going on. This wasn't just a delay, it was a move to buy time. The flight attendant returned, looking even more uncomfortable than before. She avoided making eye contact with Amara and her father. The tension was palpable, but Amara noticed something. She could feel it in the air. She was the reason for the delay. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. Someone had made a call that would change everything. Her father, noticing the flight attendant's uneasy expression, stood up again, his voice calm but full of authority. "What exactly is the issue?" he demanded. The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably, clearly dreading the answer she had to give. "There's been a report," she said, hesitating. "The captain needs to verify certain details about your daughter's travel." Amara's stomach dropped. The cold, sharp feeling of dread spread through her. A report? Who would make a report about her? What kind of report was this? Who made the report? What did they say about Amara that led to this moment? Was it just a coincidence or something more? Amara's heart pounded as her father's voice grew more insistent. "A report? From who?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing. But the flight attendant didn't answer. Instead, she shifted nervously on her feet, clearly avoiding the question. Before she could speak again, the man who had stolen Amara's seat shifted in his seat, his expression now smug with a hint of satisfaction. His phone vibrated once more in his pocket. He'd made the call and he knew it. He watched Amara and her father closely, his smirk growing wider with every passing second. Amara could feel it. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. The delay, the captain's announcement, it all pointed to something deeper, something far more sinister. What was really happening here? Why had the airline suddenly grounded the entire plane over an issue with a young girl's seat? Her father, ever the protector, stood tall and firm beside her. "This is harassment," he said, his voice steady but his gaze fierce. "You're targeting my daughter because of one man's prejudice. This is wrong." But the flight attendant just stood there, avoiding his eyes. The silence was deafening. Amara felt the eyes of the passengers on her, some sympathetic, others skeptical. She could hear the whispers begin to spread, a murmur of rumors and suspicion. Fraudulent ID scam, troublemaker. The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but she refused to let them show. Her chin lifted just a little higher, her back a little straighter. She wasn't a scam. She wasn't a troublemaker. She was Amara Jenkins, the CEO of Dreamscape, a company that she had built from the ground up. She had worked hard for everything. She had, and no one was going to take that from her. And yet the implication of fraud hung in the air like a shadow, darkening everything around her. Who made the report? Was this really about the seat, or was it something much darker? And what's going to happen when the officers board? The tension in the cabin had reached a boiling point. Every eye was on Amara, her father, and the flight attendants as they waited for security to arrive. It felt like time had slowed down. The whispers among the passengers grew louder. Fraudulent. troublemaker, and Amara could feel the weight of their judgments pressing against her chest. Then finally, the door at the front of the cabin opened, and two security officers stepped onto the plane. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces serious. It wasn't just a routine check. Amara's stomach twisted into knots. She knew they weren't here for just any reason. They were here because of the call. One of the officers approached, his voice flat. "Miss Jenkins, Mr. Jenkins," he said, glancing at them both. "Please come with us." A ripple of shock spread through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks trying to catch a glimpse of the commotion. Some had started recording with their phones, while others exchanged uncertain glances. Amara stood up, clutching her backpack tightly, her small frame barely visible in the crowd of onlookers, but her back was straight, her head held high. She wasn't going to let this moment define her. Her father walked beside her, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder, guiding her down the aisle. "This is harassment," he told the officers again, his voice calm but sharp. "You're wrong about her." But the officers didn't respond. They remained professional, escorting Amara and Marcus off the plane, and the stares from the passengers burned into Amara's memory as they moved toward the gate. As the door closed behind them, the murmur of voices from the cabin grew louder, but there was one voice in particular that stood out, the man who had stolen Amara's seat. He was speaking softly, but his words carried an edge. "She's a fraud," he muttered, almost under his breath. "A scam artist?" Amara's heart clenched. A fraud? How could anyone say that about her? About everything she had worked for? The officers led them down the sterile, empty hallway, and the harsh fluorescent light seemed to magnify the weight of the situation. Amara could feel the eyes of everyone on her, even though no one was speaking. Why are the officers so calm? What happens next in this glass-walled room? What will they ask her? The sterile white walls of the airport terminal felt suffocating as Amara and her father were escorted into a glass-walled conference room. The noise from the terminal faded, leaving only the heavy silence of the room, punctuated by the sharp clicking of heels on the cold floor. Amara could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to show fear. This was not who she was. This wasn't how her story was supposed to go. They were led to the table, where several agents were already sitting, their eyes trained on the pair. The air felt thick with suspicion. Amara's stomach churned. Was this really happening? One of the agents, a man with a cold, calculating stare, looked at her passport and business documents laid out before them. "We've received a report about your company," he began, his tone dry and formal. "Allegations of fraud, suspicious offshore accounts, and questionable financial transfers. We need to verify these claims." Amara's breath caught in her throat. Allegations of fraud? Who would say such things about her? About Dreamscape, the company she had built from scratch? Her hands clenched into fists under the table. The injustice of it all burned in her chest. How had things gone so wrong? Her father, sitting beside her, leaned forward. "Every transfer is documented," he said, his voice unwavering. "There's nothing illegal. Everything we've done has been part of our global education initiative." His eyes were sharp, protective, and full of resolve. But Amara could see the tension in his jaw, the muscles tight with frustration. He was fighting for her, for their dream, but the damage had already been done. The weight of these accusations was enough to jeopardize everything they had worked for. Another agent, a woman, scanned through the pile of documents. "These audits are public," she said, flipping through pages. "Everything seems legitimate so far, but this report is persistent. Someone is claiming irregularities." Amara's mind raced. Who made the report? Was this some kind of twisted game? Or was there something more at play? The man who'd stolen her seat kept echoing in her mind. Had he really gone this far? Had he used his power to ruin her life? And yet, despite everything, Amara refused to break. She couldn't. She had built Dreamscape to break barriers, to give young people like her access to education, to prove that anyone could achieve greatness, no matter their age, their race, or the obstacles in their way. But the hardest part was yet to come. Who was behind the report? And why did they want to bring down Dreamscape? How far was this conspiracy willing to go? The next morning, the unthinkable happened. Richard Blackwell, the man who had stolen Amara's seat, walked into the hotel room where Amara and her father were staying. He was visibly shaken, his once confident demeanor now replaced with guilt and fear. His eyes darted nervously, unable to meet either of theirs. I made the call," Blackwell admitted, his voice low and hesitant. "I called security. I wanted you off that plane. I thought, if I could get you out of that seat, I could prove something. But it wasn't just about the seat. It was about you. About her, a black child in first class. I couldn't stand it. Amara's blood ran cold. She had suspected that there was more to this than just a stolen seat, but hearing him admit it sent a wave of anger through her. How could someone be so blinded by prejudice? How could anyone think they had the right to strip her of her dignity like this? But Blackwell wasn't finished. He shifted uneasily, reaching into his briefcase and pulling out a manila folder. I work for NextGen, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but now I can't stop it. Our leadership, they've been planning this for months. They knew you were a threat. They knew Dreamscape was growing too fast, and they wanted to tear it down. My call, my report, it gave them the chance they were waiting for. It was never about a seat. It was about destroying you. Amara's chest tightened. She had always known that her success would attract enemies. But to learn that an entire company, an entire system, was working to sabotage her, it felt like a punch to the gut. But she wasn't going to let this break her. Her father stood up, fists clenched at his sides. You've done enough damage, he said, his voice filled with disgust. You're going to pay for this. You're not just stealing seats. You're trying to steal dreams. But Blackwell wasn't done yet. He slid the folder across the table, his face pale. There's more, he said, his voice almost trembling. I know everything. The emails, the meetings, the plans to bring down Dreamscape. It's all here. Amara stared at the folder. This was the proof she needed. This wasn't just about her being a child or about racism. This was about a multi-million-dollar conspiracy that aimed to take her company down and ruin her life. But now she had a choice. The stakes were higher than ever. She could take this evidence and expose the truth. Or she could let Blackwell walk away, allowing the conspiracy to keep going. Will Amara expose the truth to the world? Or will she take a more dangerous path and confront those pulling the strings behind NextGen's plot? The choice she makes here could change everything. Blackwell wasn't done yet. He slid the folder across the table, his face pale. There's more, he said, his voice almost trembling. I know everything. The emails, the meetings, the plans to bring down Dreamscape. It's all here. Amara stared at the folder. This was the proof she needed. This wasn't just about her being a child or about racism. This was about a multi-million-dollar conspiracy that aimed to take her company down and ruin her life. But now she had a choice. The stakes were higher than ever. She could take this evidence and expose the truth. Or she could let Blackwell walk away, allowing the conspiracy to keep going. Will Amara expose the truth to the world? Or will she take a more dangerous path and confront those pulling the strings behind NextGen's plot? The choice she makes here could change everything. Amara's fingers trembled as she flipped through the folder Blackwell had handed over. It was thick with damning evidence, emails, internal documents, records of meetings where Dreamscape was discussed as a target. The conspiracy was deeper than anyone had imagined. This was no longer just about a stolen seat. It was about a corporate war, and Dreamscape was the casualty. Her father stood beside her, his jaw tight with anger. He knew this was their moment, the moment they could either destroy their enemies or take the fall for everything. The decision was in their hands. We take this to the authorities, Marcus said, his voice calm, but filled with the weight of 1,000 decisions. We show the world the truth. We bring these people down. But Amara, despite the storm of emotions inside her, knew there was more at stake. Dreamscape wasn't just a company. It was her vision. It was every sleepless night spent coding, every minute spent fighting for a future that seemed impossible. She couldn't let it all crumble, just because someone was too afraid of her success. The next morning, Amara, her father, and their legal team walked into a room full of federal investigators. The evidence from Blackwell's confession, the files, the emails, they were all laid out in front of them. This is corporate espionage, one of the agents said, his voice thick with disbelief. They tried to destroy your company using lies, prejudice, and manipulation. We'll make sure this goes public. Within days, the news spread like wildfire. NextGen was exposed for their role in the conspiracy, with their executives facing charges of corporate espionage and fraud. Richard Blackwell was immediately fired from his position, his reputation shattered. The stock prices of his company plummeted, and the once untouchable giant was brought to its knees. But for Amara, the victory was bittersweet. She had stood firm, refused to back down, and had exposed the truth. She had done it not just for herself, But for every young girl, every person of color, every underdog who had ever been told they